So I know there was a lot of information there, a lot of new information, or newish information for you guys. I know it's a lot longer than it was previously, but we would have to follow a very similar process whether it goes in here or not. So I would rather specify that process very clearly so you all and the public and developers understand what it's going to take and what the rules are, instead of just kind of flying by the seat of our pants without any. Yeah. So with that, are there any questions, concerns, comments?
Mike?
Yes, I'm looking at, I mean, I know it can be done this way, that when you have a plan unit, when you have a PUD process, the planning commission, and then the city council approves it. I'm familiar with that concept. Doesn't the zoning enabling act allow under these types of developments? Maybe I'm referring the wrong act, but doesn't it allow in some like if the jurisdiction so chooses, the planning commission can be solely responsible for everything regarding the planning unit development process where it doesn't need to go to council?
You could, but not if it's a rezoning, it's got to go to council.
Okay.
Some communities address PUDs as special land uses instead of rezonings. In which case, I think we could authorize the planning commission to do everything. I prefer the rezoning aspect. I think it's longer, but it's a little less risky for the developers, I think, because it allows for that concept plan and final plan process, which they can accelerate if they want to. But yeah, that might be a way, if we switched up the process and made it so it wasn't a rezoning and it was a special use instead, that might be. The other change with it too is that if it's a special land use, someone could appeal that to circuit court. And if it's a rezoning, they can, that process is not built in. So if someone didn't like it with a rezoning, then they would have to file a petition to send it to referendum, get it on the ballot, and the voters can vote it up or down, which I just went through that just this past year, actually. And so that took a really long time. The referendum part took, 7, 8, or 9 months to get on the ballot. It took a really long time. So that's the other difference, the biggest difference, I guess.
One other difference, Mike, is I think as planning commission chair, I'm looking at, we've got 5 new members on this committee.
Sure.
And I'm not all that experienced in PUDs myself. I've done one, I think, in my lifetime, and they are complicated. And while Williams and Works and Andy certainly will give us due guidance, I think having the city council, the attorney, that sort of thing, look at it is probably a good safeguard for the city in the long run. I mean, it may save 10 minutes not to do it, but it could save a lot of time if you guys do it. So my recommendation would be to keep it under that system.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Hey, questions from the audience?
Todd Shaw, I applaud you go in this direction with PUDs because it's a tool that probably every other municipality around here has and use effectively. I have a concern that the concept is it's supposed to provide flexibility and it's a tool for a developer, but also, as Andy said and as Mike has said, it gives the city probably greater control because at the end of the day, if you don't like it, you don't approve it, and if you do approve it, there's all these stipulations as to how it needs to be delivered. With that said, if the PUD is consistent with the underlying zoning, I'm troubled by the thought that the process is going to take twice as long as if it just came in consistent with the zoning right from the start was a PUD. So in my mind, there shouldn't be a penalty for somebody putting a better foot forward in the PUD process than if they just try to meet the existing requirements and didn't have double the time associated with it. I'm also not clear on when full building plans need to be submitted for that, because most municipalities don't require you to submit building elevations and that type of thing with PUD. A lot of times it's here's the uses, that's the most important part of it, here's how it all works, here's the flow, here's the parking, here's the green space, here's setbacks, And so put a developer in position where they have to submit plans as part of the process versus plans being part of the staff review process also is more cumbersome. So I wasn't being disrespectful to the process. I was making notes on my phone as we were going. So that's kind of the notes I got.
No, we appreciate that.
I'd also like to say that performance guarantee, I think, should be limited to roads and infrastructure and that type of thing versus just a blank statement of performance guarantee, so that it doesn't cover buildings and the whole project. I mean, it should be limited to what the normal zoning would limit it to.
Yeah, so I guess I'll address them in order. With regard to the process, with the PUD being a rezoning, we can't accelerate it too much. The planning commission has to see it. The city council has to hold a hearing without question when a PUD is a rezoning. It's not optional. We could make the planning commission public hearing optional. So, and if an applicant wanted to submit everything up front, it could be, from planning commission with everything to city council and then done, in theory.
What would everything up front look like?
It would be, so you'd have to do, the grading and stormwater and all that design would have to be done and submitted along with your initial package.
Is that usually submitted for a project that would meet the current zoning and all the requirements? Or is that a staff process where the project's approved and then staff reviews the infrastructure plans, site grading, utilities and all that stuff and says, all right, this meets city requirements versus it being part of a planning process?
Yeah, I mean, everything would come through, would be reviewed by staff to inform the planning commission decision, I guess. So if it, with stormwater and grading and utility connections and all that, that would get, routed around to the correct departments within the city, during that process, so that they would make a recommendation to the planning commission and council as to whether or not they should approve that or not.
So my experience has been, one would submit a plan, be it a site plan under PUD or under the current zoning ordinance, and it's approved, but then part of the approval is that it meets the city requirements for stormwater detention and utilities and that type of thing. Which then usually gets drawn subsequent to an approval. So that the developer has an approval for the project and then they go spend the money to have it fully engineered versus under the scenario you said, they could speed it up and submit it all in one process. I mean, that would not be normally how you do it. You would spend the money on designing your utilities after you have an approved project.
I mean, usually there's some at least conceptual illustration of utilities. Some of the things that we've run into before with that is that, somebody will have a conceptual utility plan and they'll get approved, and then if they have to make a change after the fact that requires, buildings to get moved around, they gotta come back here anyway. So we at least want it engineered enough to know that you wouldn't have to do that and have that design at least, mostly complete, if not perfectly complete. The building plans and everything would be after the fact, like they are now. We do condition a lot of things. All of our plans that come in here have utilities, stormwater, all that shown on there. There are usually a handful of pieces of information after the fact that we would still approve it with those conditions, and then the applicant would work with staff engineers, behind the scenes after the approval to make sure that everything gets finished and done properly.
Yeah, I guess, and that's what I was looking at. What's the size of the basket that needs to be brought in to be approved? Because there's so many things that typically are subject to meeting city's stormwater requirements or city utility requirements, and that stuff's brought in after projects are approved. Staff reviews it, or Williams and Works in this case would review it and say, all right, the utility plan that they submitted meets all the city requirements.
So
it wasn't a discussion about what uses are going to be there and how the project looks and that type of thing, because truthfully, including myself, most planning commissions, city council members, and myself have no clue on what size pipe should be, how many linear feet,
Right.
et cetera, et cetera. So that's not something that's taken up at those meetings. It's uses and is it consistent with the city master plan and underlying zoning, and that's the stuff that gets approved. And then the approval is subject to meeting the city requirements for utilities.
Yeah, I mean, I would say to the extent that it would affect the design of the project is what we would need to see up front. Now, whether or not a pipe came in from, you know, from 40 feet over here versus 40 feet over there, you know, I don't know if that matters a whole lot from a planning commission perspective, but.
Right, and also the concept that there is a concept plan, you know, that we would go through before you do the heavy lifting, if you would. And the idea there is to say, okay, this is where you want to go, and yes, if you want to go any further, this is what you would need to do at that point. So there's those steps built in. I think is what you're saying is, you know, you want to have that approval, and by going with the concept, and there was a second one, and then a third one actually.
Well, there's the concept plan. I mean, there's an optional preliminary step where it can be very crudely sketched out.
Right.
And then there's the concept plan and rezoning, which is kind of one step. And then if that's approved by council, then there's just a final site plan.
Final site plan. So once that concept plan, you know, if that is approved, then that's where you would be looking at the more heavy duty thing with the site plan. And a lot of that, as Andy has said, you're right. I wouldn't know one pipe from another, frankly. But the object is we do have the experts that do, and we need to have that assurance that that is a step that is being followed and taken care of. So that's kind of a.
Yeah, that's usually where the subject to meet city utility requirements comes in
Yeah.
after an approval is in place.
Yeah.
I've just had experience in other communities, one particular suburb outside Milwaukee that I'm thinking of that had thought they were doing a positive thing, doubled time frame associated with it, and quadrupled the expense associated with it, and immediately turned off pretty much all development. I would encourage the planning commission not to adopt a process that takes longer than a normal site plan review process, and it's not more expensive than a normal site plan review process. Because at the end of the day, your stated goals are more flexibility, but it's consistent with the master plan and the city's purpose. So it still should function the same way. And that's on, I guess I would encourage.
Did that answer your question on what you should bring in your basket to get approved? I mean,
Sounds like it's kind of evolving.
And it is.
At first it started with the whole thing, and then it kind of got to, all right, well, we don't need that level of detail, so it's still not clear.
Right.
If you look at a lot of other municipalities, planning commission approves the concept, right? You look at a plan up on the screen, you say, all right, that's great, or you challenge a developer on, you know what, have you talked to this neighbor about screening? Yes, no, you know, landscaping, let's do a burn, that type of thing, and that's what you focus on. And then you get a plan that's approved, subject to staff review of final utility plans and all that type of stuff, which is nothing that, you know, you're concerned about, because you've got the mechanism in place that that stuff needs to be submitted, and it needs to be consistent with the city's staff approval or Williamson Works approval.
I guess I'm not sure that the plan that we've seen here tonight would be any different in the long run from what you're asking for, or what you're suggesting anyway. And again, this is the first time we've looked at it. There will be a public hearing in roughly a month.
Sounds to me like it's twice the time and probably more expensive.
I don't really, it would be more time consuming, because I think the project themselves are generally larger than what we generally look at. We generally look at a building addition or something along that line. This is, you know, much larger in scope, just by the nature of what they're asking for, complete rezoning, which is what it is. So we have to take a look at all of those factors that are in the rezoning. That alone will take, you know, more time. So, I don't think it would take any more time than if somebody came in and asked for a rezone and wanted to put in a project. I think that time frame would be the exact same. I don't see any difference.
It's going to be virtually impossible to do it on the same time frame as we do a site plan. Because a site plan comes in, if everything's there, which we meet with them behind the scenes beforehand to make sure it is,
Right.
they come in, it's all there, it's one meeting,
Yeah.
it's approved usually, and with conditions, and then we're done.
Right.
This, because of the nature of the hearing and the approval needed by city council and things like that, it's going to necessitate a longer process, no matter what. I mean, I would like for it to go really, really fast too, but unless we completely, completely alter the way that we do these and eliminate all that oversight, you're not going to get a faster process. This can be pretty fast, and we certainly could if the commission is open, looking at it changes along those lines to kind of, instead of having a kind of a 3-step process or a 4-step process, we make some of those optional, or make it a little less.
And I think this ordinance does that, it allows that flexibility to do those kinds of things.
Is there a reason why the planning commission would hold a public hearing and then the city council would hold a public hearing on the same thing?
We didn't do that in Fenton. I know that the planning commission did everything.
Well, with PUD being a rezoning, there is case law out that requires the legislative body to hold a public hearing on a PUD rezoning. That's something we have to do. Now, the planning commission could skip it. The issues with that I see are that, one, if we're not notifying people about a PUD within 300 feet until it's already been approved by planning commission, politically that can be challenging. Because people show up and go, well, you guys already approved this thing and you didn't even, and now you're telling me about it? You know what I mean? So politically it can be tough. Some communities do it though. Some communities skip the planning commission public hearing or make it optional, in which cases you still have to have a meeting, it still has to go through planning commission, there's just not a hearing. So depending on the project, if it's a very small minor project, it doesn't really make any difference. If it's a big project, then you could have, 2 meetings. I mean, you could have 1 meeting where people just show up at the public hearing and talk about it for 2 hours. And the planning commission doesn't do anything, come back at the next meeting. That's all dependent on folks that show up. So if we're interested in trying to accelerate the process a little bit, one of the things I would do is make that first planning commission public hearing optional and let you all decide if you want there to be one or not, or we can, I guess, decide, but.
Yes,
So
if we're
that's one thing.
My thought is if we're going to go through the process of having a hearing or, doing a meeting on the project, why not do the public hearing at the same time? I mean, it doesn't make any sense to me.
Oh, it just takes longer to do the public hearing.
Well, yeah, but,
But if we skip that, then that would speed it up.
yeah,
It depends. I mean, we haven't had any really majorly controversial projects, development projects here. I mean, we've had a few where there have been, 5 or 10 people here or something.
and
Not anywhere we've had 150.
And furthermore, if there is a question, and if the place is packed here, that's why we're here. I mean, we should entertain the public at that point, and it obviously is a question. And if it takes time, it takes time, but you want to get it right. I guess I don't have a problem with that at all.
What you folks are talking about now feels very friendly, makes sense. And I don't want to mince words, but I think the planning commission doesn't approve a project, they recommend approval to the city council. So it wouldn't be a situation where somebody says, oh wow, the planning commission approved this. The city council makes that ultimate approval. It's a recommendation to approve or disapprove. So you have the public hearing part as part of the project being reviewed by the planning commission. You're killing 2 birds with 1 stone, and that makes a lot of sense. And that's how you get the feedback on the project right there in real time.
And
That's the way I would see it.
yeah, I mean, sometimes what happens too is that if it gets to council without the public really having, without having been notified and having a hearing, council might say, well, there's a lot of changes here, so let's send us back to planning commission and have more time longer. And then, again, that makes that frame longer. So, there's not a perfect way to do it. Every application is different. Every application has some challenges. We have no idea what we're going to get with certain projects. Some of them, sometimes I'll know as soon as I look at a site plan, I go, this is going to be a tough one. And sometimes I get surprised, I think it's gonna be tough and it's not, or I think it's gonna be a simple one and it's, half the town shows up.
One of the other
Follow
things
is different.
that happens is, when we've done ordinances here, there's been, because they're new, they're unnoticed things that happen that we don't really think of ahead of time. I mean, that's part of the process. And we've never had a PUD, so timeframes and things of that nature, I think we're guessing at what would happen. But I would think if I was sitting on the city council, and I'm certainly not wanting to at all, but I would certainly want to have the planning commission have a recommendation and have a public hearing so that I would have it on the record as to what the city residents want. And then make their decision. That would be my take on it, but, that's why we'll have a public hearing on this and take a vote. Thank you for your input, though.
Well, thanks for the opportunity to provide some
Appreciate it.
feedback.
Yeah. And very valid points. I mean, that's one of the reasons why Andy's here, to take those points under consideration, and he may have some changes when we do our public hearings. So, and we always leave that up to him, and that's one of the reasons why we do that. So we'd rather get it right and try to anyway. That's the whole object. Commissioners, any other input? Then I think our instructions are to do the public hearing for the PUD and also the 3 residentials at our next monthly meeting.
Yes,
Is that enough time for noticing and everything?
could be. We have time to get the notice, and I'm sure we do.
And commissioners, do you have any charges for Andy for changes or anything along that line that you can see? Okay. Thank you, Andy. Really appreciate that. Staff report? Sue?
I have nothing further to report.
Mike, anything? Anything new? Okay. Andy, anything else?
Nothing I can think of.
Okay, we're up to date on everything else. Kelly, you get to lead us off.
I'm good.
Okay. Dave?
Good.
Amanda?
I'm good.
And I am good too, so. Thank you all. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
And a support? Support. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
We stand adjourned, folks. Thank you.